Hey everyone, and we're live. Welcome to another session of On .NET Live. I'm your host, Cecil Phillip, and here on this show is where we talk about all the great things that are happening in the world of .NET. We usually feature lots of folks from the community, talk about lots of great projects that they're working on, and even talking about some of the events that are going on in the world of the .NET ecosystem. Today, I have my buddy Michael, who's going to be here to talk to us about reactive extensions and even talk to us about some patterns that we can make use of with reactive extensions inside our applications. So, Michael, why don't you really quickly introduce yourself and let folks know who you are?
Sure. My name is Mike Stonis. I work for a company named 8bot, where I help companies build mobile applications. I've been doing mobile application development for about a decade, which seems weird to say that out loud because it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but certainly has. Typically helping people build stuff in Azure and with Xamarin and using Xamarin Forms, all that kind of good stuff. But I've been a huge fan of doing reactive extensions and making use of reactive extensions for a lot of the mobile development that I do. So that's one of the big things I'm into. Also pretty interested in Skia. So if you've ever heard of Skia for cross-platform drawing, another thing that I tinker around with quite a bit. But that's kind of me. I'm out here in Chicago, just hanging out at the moment, trying to avoid the cold. Been playing some pinball and stuff out at the house here, but that's pretty much me.
Nice. And Michael, we've had you on the show a couple of times in the past, but it's been a while. So I figured it's about time we do a re-up episode real quick and just catch up on what are some of the cool things that we should be paying attention to, particularly when it comes to the world of, reactive extensions.
Yeah. So, what I thought we would do today is kind of take an introductory first step in and use that as a chance to, because a lot of the feedback that I get from people, especially on reactive extensions, is I don't know where to start, right? And so what I thought we would do is kind of take a look at how we would maybe write a regular .NET application, or how we would normally use .NET, and then how we could enhance that maybe, or replace some of those features with the reactive extension frameworks out there.
Sure. But before we do that, really quick, I do have some links that we want to talk about super quick.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a look at some of these links and some of these events, and then we'll really dive into the world of RX.
You got it.
So first link I kind of want to talk about and show everyone here. So Xamarin Forms 5.0 is here. So if you may not have heard this before, I mean, this actually happened just a little bit over a week ago. If you're a Xamarin developer, if you're interested in building mobile apps, this is a really great release. Tons of excellent features that are inside of here. And I think it's also fitting because I feel like RX and Xamarin Forms kind of go hand in hand when it comes to like dealing with some of those more reactive asynchronous type operations. Would that be right, Michael?
I mean, you're speaking directly to me. Yeah, this is speaking to my heart. Of course they do. Yeah. When it comes, especially for mobile applications, they're high touch applications, highly asynchronous. There are lots of user interaction, lots of API calls, things like that. And RX just kind of makes your life a breeze to integrate it there for your applications.
For sure. So again, if you're a mobile developer, definitely make sure you go ahead and check it out. And we'd love to hear any feedback that you have. So Xamarin Forms is on GitHub. So I believe if you click on this thing, it'll actually take you to the Git repo. Oh, I'm lying. No, that doesn't do it. But there's a link in here somewhere. Yeah. There's a link in here somewhere that'll take you to the Git repo.
And this is a great release. I know David Orton now and his team and everybody else involved in this really put a ton of love into it. And really just a ton of features that the community were asking for a long time got in there. So really a pretty awesome release.
For sure. So again, you can head over to github.com/Xamarin/Xamarin.forms and go ahead and just let folks know what you think about it. And you can even send like feature requests and all that type of stuff too. And I think it's great that this release and a lot of releases before it have been happening in the open. So that's definitely a plus.
Absolutely.
Now, next link I want to talk to about, and I think this is actually the first that we're speaking about this publicly, .NET Conf, February 25th, 2021. 100% online, fully live stream. And we're going to be doing a focus event on Windows. So we're going to be talking a lot about desktop development, UWP and WinForms, and all of the great things that a lot of .NET developers love when it comes to building desktop applications. So definitely make sure you check it out. you can head over to focus.netconf.net, and you can save the date. You could tweet it and add it to your calendar and do all the great things. So if you're interested in desktop development, make sure you head over to focus.netconf.net and save the date.
Love
now.
forms. Gotta say.
Oh, do you? Are you a Forms fan?
That's where I got started with .NET by and large. So,
it's surprising how many WinForms developers are there. Not that there's a lot of them, but also just how much they love WinForms. You know what I mean? Like if you're a WinForms developer, like you either really love it or like you just don't mess with it. Like it's either one or the other.
Yep.
All right, Michael. So I'm going to switch over to your desktop now.
Sure.
And why don't we get into talking about RX for a little bit?
You got it. So actually, with the release of Xamarin Forms, with having that .NET Conf focused in on there, with doing sort of Windows development and desktop development, today, I think we'll be looking at here, it's a Xamarin Forms application. It's kind of like a boilerplate stock standard starting point for a Forms application. But a lot of the things that we look at here, we're going to carry over directly to Forms, because obviously that's where we're at. But even if you are like a Windows desktop developer, so if you are, that WinForms developer or, WPF, UWP, all those types of UI frameworks benefit from this stuff. So, no matter where you're at, it's kind of a cool thing. This isn't just on mobile or just on, this very particular release kind of thing. What we'll look at here crosses basically all different UI paradigms, I guess, all different .NET UI paradigms, which is cool.
Sure.
So I guess with that, let's just kind of take a look at where we are starting off here and kind of take it from there. So what I have, it's basically just like I mentioned, that sort of out of the box Forms application. I've added a couple of different entry fields out here. So I've got like a first name field, a last name field, and let's see if we could we'll preview it here. I've got a first name field, a last name field, the ability to calculate our name, which is where we'll do like a little bit of work or a unit of work out there. And then we have a label down below, which is going to show whatever we've done. So, from that perspective, pretty simple. Really haven't done much out here, just kind of, again, out of the box type of stuff. If we look at our code from the code behind then, again, same thing, basically just out of the box stuff. I do have a view model, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for right now, you can imagine that this is really just our components that come, sort of a template application that comes when you start up a new Forms application. So just real light setup here. So what I wanted to do is first we're going to take kind of a setup pass at doing some things which I'll say are like sort of the out of the box or the standard .NET way, right? What that means could mean a million things. I know that there's so many different ways to do .NET development, like if you're doing MVVM or if you're doing a different design pattern or, something like that. But I'm going to say we're going to do traditional .NET to start off with, right? So kind of like the event-based patterns and stuff like that, all of us are probably somewhat familiar with if you've done some UI development for .NET in the past, right? So what I want to do, or what I would like to accomplish here, is I would like my application to take my first name, take my last name, and when I click this calculate name button, I want it to take those two values, put them together, and then show them, right? And so if we are doing this, kind of in pure .NET, if you will, we would do something like look for our, let me grab the name of that button again, just jumped out of my head. We would look for our full name button here. So we'd say full name button. We might use something like a clicked event, right? So we could do this a number of different ways. We could set up our handler down here, right? So I've got my click down there. And now I've got this handler down here, and we might say something like, full name dot text equals, maybe just format this up here really quick, right? So we'll just say, and But just a real simple application out here. We'll run this and just verify that it works, right? So again, like I said, this is kind of our traditional .NET development pattern. Events that get raised from the user interface and then something to handle those events. Whenever I talk to people for .NET, though, a lot of the feedback that I get is, I don't know where to start with, or when I talk to people about reactive, rather, right. They say, I don't know really where to start with reactive extensions. So, I've done events, I've built applications before, but I don't really know a good starting point. And it always comes back to me that, events are one of the best starting points out there. So what we're going to do is, again, we'll just verify that this works. I'll just say.
And you're right, too, because I think one of the best ways to learn a new thing is to start with something you already know, right?
Totally.
And how can I take the thing that I already know and kind of write it in a different way or use a different framework so that now I know what the expected behavior is, but just now I'm taking a different approach to do that same thing.
Right. And so that's why I figured this is something that we're all probably roughly familiar with and could easily translate here over to that RX world. So one of the things, so just to point out a few things. So, right, especially in the mobile world, one of the things that becomes especially problematic with events is we need to make sure that we clean up after ourselves, right? So one of the things that I see a bit of people doing is something like full name button.clicked plus equals, and they'll use like an
anonymous delegate or anonymous function or something.
Right. And, they'll, do work here, right? The problem with this is there's no great way to unsubscribe from it, right? So I've got that event hooked up there, but I don't have a clean way to let that clean up. So that's always kind of a problem, and maybe something that we could address once we get out here and start looking at some of the reactive side of things. And same thing here, even if I don't use that anonymous, I still have this created, but never really unsubscribed from it. So what happens, what could happen is potentially long-term, got kind of this like slow memory leak that occurs and things don't get swept up. And maybe after a few minutes or hours of using my app, it just dies and I don't know why, right? So always a problem, like I said, kind of more of a bigger problem on mobile just because our devices aren't as good as something like a desktop. One of the other things that I think is also a little bit cumbersome with events, especially as your application evolves, is that you have some handler, like in this case, we've got it set up in the constructor. And then you've got we set up our event up here, and then you've got the handler method somewhere else. So imagine if you've got like a pretty long code file, you're up here, you see that you're doing something, but then you have to kind of skim down or, you got to F12 down and see if you could find that code. Right. And it sometimes can be a little bit cumbersome, right? So let's see how we would do this in the reactive world and see if it's any better. Let me just clean this up here a little bit.
And as you're saying that, we got some comments that are coming in the chat. One person here is saying, events lead people to use more global state.
I agree. Yeah, because again, you need to throw stuff here, there, and everywhere, right? So and maybe that's something we could take a look at here. But if you've got like two different buttons that maybe need to work on the same type of data, it could be hard to correlate that together, right? Traditional .NET events would make that difficult to correlate together. And I think we could probably even show an example of this in a few minutes and kind of see how we could solve that issue. But yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, for sure. We do have one funny one. Maybe you could talk about this. This is not really related to RX, but I kind of want to put this one up. It says, "Why does VS look so clean on Mac OS, but ugly and messy on Windows?"
It's the Mac. I gotta say, I'm a long-term .NET developer, so I grew up on Windows. I growing up was so anti-Macs. It was more of a feud back then, I would say, than today. It's not really a big thing, but and I'm going to say I was forced to use a Mac, right? Because for doing mobile development.
Sure, that makes sense.
And I did not like the Mac at first, and I did not like the design for everything at the Mac at first. But then it's kind of grown on me, and I'm like, oh, it's so clean. And I feel the same way. Going back to regular Visual Studio, I'm like, it feels like a developer made it to me, right? There's 8 million little buttons to click and everything, which I also kind of love in a way, but it's definitely clean out here.
Yeah, I think what I notice is like people in Windows love VS on Windows, and people on Macs love VS on Mac. You know what I mean? And I very few times do I find someone that likes both of them, because it's always my button is moved and this thing is in a different place, and you don't have this feature or that feature, or startup is different, or whatever the case is. And you know what? Like everyone just has their own opinions, and that's fine. You know what I mean? Because we all like what we like, but the thing is just to use the thing that makes you the most productive.
We all can agree that VS Code is incredible, though, right?
We can do that.
Whatever your primary IDE is, we can all agree VS Code on the side is beautiful out there. So,
right.
But yeah, depending on what your workflow is, it's gonna, whichever one might work better for you out there.
Right, for sure.
So in talking about converting that event over to reactive extensions, the first topic that we kind of have to talk about here is the observables, right? So in reactive extensions, we have this concept of something called, we have to create essentially an observable. An observable is basically something that's going to emit data for us, right? So, you could think of it as, we can make one from, we'll just say like an interval, right? It's just running at some time span period. We could base these off of, let's see, what would be like another good one. Get into those quite yet, but we could build it off of a range. Like we could have an observable built and go from like 0 to 100. But what we're going to look at here first is we're going to take a .NET event, and we are going to wrap that up as an observable. Because again, we need something that basically emits data for us. And so in a lot of ways, when we talk about observable extensions, or excuse me, reactive extensions, the observable is kind of like the opposite of an IEnumerable. So we have this IObservable, which is we're going to sit out here and listen for data to be provided to us. Maybe it'll come in a little bit. Maybe it'll never happen. Whereas like with an IEnumerable, you're going to kind of get, like a block of data back. So maybe you queried a database, you get all the records back from the database, and then we say, here you go, here's your records, right? So instead of kind of getting this dump of data, we're setting up almost like an emitter of data that we're interested in. So let me get this set up here really quick. We'll say our...
And as you're doing that, I'm just kind of scrolling through chat and see what everyone here is talking about. One person saying VS for Mac came from Xamarin, didn't it? And I believe that's still the case. I believe the current code base is still based on Xamarin Studio, like the original Xamarin Studio.
Yeah, mono develop all the way back to mono develop. So
mono develop, right. That was like pre-Xamarin days, right? When we talk about mono development.
Totally, yeah. And it's still out there. I think that's still open source. I should probably know the answer to that, but I don't know 100% offhand.
Okay.
But yeah, the lineage is definitely from mono develop. So I know what is now VS for Mac has had many visual overhauls.
Right.
So.
And then one more person, this question is coming in from YouTube. And person is asking, how are you using the emulator so fast? It says, I can't debug/run without a 3 to 5 minute build.
So I am using the iOS simulator, which is substantially faster than the Android simulator. So if you're doing an Android simulator, those are pretty slow.
Yeah.
Also, I've got a fairly beefy Mac, so I'm sure that that's not hurting anything out here as well.
Do you have one of those, what's that stuff called? The one of the
M1?
new ones, the M1 chips?
No, we're holding off for like the M1 Plus. I desperately want one though. They look pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah, this is sort of the last gen, probably the last Intel that I got over here. So
got it.
Back to the event, right? So what I need to do is I need to wrap up our traditional .NET event and convert it to that observable. And so here I've got this extension method built right into Reactive Extensions that's called from event pattern. From event patterns, kind of neat. So what it's going to do is it's going to give me, with this first parameter, the ability to subscribe to an event. And then you'll notice the second parameter down here, which is the unsubscribe. So what that means is that when we're done with this, or when I'm not interested in getting these notifications later on, this is the action that we're going to have this observable do to kind of clean up itself afterwards. So similar to how I mentioned before, like we don't have a default way to clean up after ourselves with just a standard .NET event. It's kind of, in a way, baked into the framework here for reactive extensions. So it pushes us down the right path, if you will.
Got it. And one of the differences I see that you're doing here is that within that same section of code, right, like you can define what the subscription method is, and like you can also unsubscribe in the same place, right? So I don't have to. It feels like it's more succinct code, right? Like it's kind of, and it's all in the same place too.
You got it 100%. So this is like my favorite thing about writing reactive extensions. So it's very similar to making the jump from, like, I'll call it like traditional enumerable management in .NET to starting to use LINQ. Nowadays, I rarely write a for loop if I could just write a select statement, right? Or
Right.
I'm very rarely going back in kind of one by one, like just doing like a for each loop or something like that. So I could kind of just always go to LINQ. I could get all my logic in there in sort of one easy to read block. And that's what reactive extensions are going to give us. It's the same kind of concept. And in fact, as we'll see here, we're going to use those same kind of operators. So just like we would have in LINQ, we're going to have our LINQ extensions or LINQ methods for reactive extensions. So just the same. So if I wanted to, what I'll have here is essentially the event that got sent from the information, rather, that got sent from my event. And if I wanted to, I could filter it or do something with it. So for example, I'll take this X object that I have here. And just like you would have with a regular .NET event, you'll have your sender and your event args. In this case, it's just a button click. So this information isn't really all that helpful. But if it was something like a text changed event or something like that, I might just want to go and take out the event args, right? I may want to pre-filter those out. If it was something more interesting, and maybe we could do an example of that in a few minutes, I could manipulate the data and prepare the data as well. So if I wanted to do something like lowercase the data or uppercase it, it gives me this nice place to go and sort of prepare the data along the way.
Gotcha. Okay.
In our case, though, at least to get started off here, what we're going to do is something very simple, and I'm going to subscribe to our observable here. So with our subscribe, basically what we're saying is, I am interested in that observable. So in this case, that the first piece here, the observable from event pattern, is kind of just setting it up. It's saying, here's a stream of data. If we didn't do anything with it here, I'm not assigning it to a variable or anything, but if you imagine if it just existed by itself out there, it's not actually going to start listening for changes. It's just saying like, hey, here's a pump for changes that you may want later on. When we introduce the subscribe in this case, though, this is where we're saying I am interested in that data. So now at this point in time, we're going to start listening for those changes to come through into our, or we're going to start, listening for those events at this point in time. So this is kind of establishing our subscription.
So if I did not call that subscribe method and I just ended after from event pattern, what would happen? Would nothing happen, and would I just not be connected to any events?
Correct. In this case, it would be referred to as a cold observable. Okay. So it basically means it's out there, it's ready to send data, but until somebody starts listening to it, it won't be a hot observable. So it won't. Sure. It's not going to be emitting our data out to us there.
That makes sense. Because I can think about situations where you might have a little bit more complex observable chains, and you might not want that stuff to just start firing by itself, right? You probably want to connect it to something, I guess, or have it associated with something. And now that thing can get like that stream of information.
Yeah, so say you had multiple people sending out data or multiple observables looking to send out data.
Mhm.
You may not want to subscribe to them one at a time, kind of ad hoc. You may want to subscribe to them in bulk. So give
Yeah,
me, when I listen to them, I don't want something that came out there, beforehand. I just want to get that data when I'm interested in it. So it gives you a way to kind of set them up and then get them all at the same time.
gotcha. Okay.
So with this, like I said, our subscription is going to make that hot. So let's do the easiest thing we could do here. And this isn't ideal. It's not production code. Don't hold me to that.
Don't copy paste this in production, please.
But you could do it something as simple as this, right? So just like we had from before. Let's grab this straight from here. Right, in my subscribe, I can go and grab this data. And I've essentially done the same thing I did before. Now, with this particular example, this is maybe a little bit more verbose because I do have this set up here from the event pattern and then the subscribe. But the one benefit, at least immediately, is that I've got this in this singular block here, right? So I could see where my data came from and then where it's going to. So it's not two separate pieces. It's just sort of one singular observable right here.
Yeah.
So let's do this really quick. And we'll just do our name again. Let's do a different last name. Right. And we can see, again, we've just recreated the same thing. Now, what would be cool, what would be cooler is if I didn't even have to click this button. I'd rather just have this thing tell me whenever the text has changed and just update itself automatically. Telling people to click buttons is okay, but like if they have to do that, they're going to get agitated, right? So what could we do to change this a little bit here? How could we start using maybe some different events to expand on this? So let's come back to our code and let's make a few slight modifications here. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have an observable from event pattern. But instead of listening for clicked, let's listen for some text changed events. So we'll do first name, text changed. And we'll do our first name text changed again. So in this case now, you'll notice that I'm getting this like, our warning squiggle out here because something's wrong. It is an event, but something's wrong about it.
Right.
The thing here is that the event that's getting raised has customized event args. So this will work for default event args. But here, your text exchange event args, we just need to give it a little bit more information. Tell it what kind of data is going to be presented to us.
Okay, got it. So then you give it the type of the handler and also the type of the event arg.
Exactly. So yeah, so it knows, okay, who's going to be subscribing to this out here. We need a handler that can subscribe it. So that's what that X will be out here. And then it's interested in what kind of args will be published from there. So now in this case, if I do select, so again, kind of going back to what we know in link, is I could say X, and I've got my event args. In this case, I've got my text changed event args. And I can say, well, I really don't want the old value. I may not care about what it was previously. Just give me whatever the latest value was, right? And now that will give me everything I need for my first name. So I could get the event and filter out my data. The other thing, so let's do the same thing, not only for our first name, but let's do this for our last name as well. Okay, I'm just going to kind of comment this for a second. And so we'll do our...
I think it's mad because of the missing semicolon on 26. I think that's why it's mad.
We're going to solve that in a second.
Okay.
Yep. So right now I've got two observables. So, I've got two places where I could pump data out and, potentially listen to them. But right now, again, like it kind of goes back to that comment about having global variables somewhere.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in doing is I want to get whatever the latest value is that came out of here, and put it together to make a full name. And so what I want to do is I'm actually going to use another operator that we have in the Reactive Extensions world, which is called combine latest. So what I could do with this is I'm going to say, here are some observables. So here we're going to listen for the text changed from my first name entry, and we're going to listen for the text change from my last name entry. We're going to filter out the data for the new text value, and then we're going to combine it. So here I'll end up, so this is our first parameter, our second parameter, then our third parameter is going to be the data that was presented. So it'll be first name and last name.
Okay.
And so here, now what I could do is I could take this and I can get whatever the most recent value is that came out of those, this notification, and I can combine it right here, right? So here, again, I'll just grab this code out of here. And I'm just going to get rid of this for a moment. And this will now become my full name. And I can do my full name here.
Someone in the chat just said, looks like RxJS. That's funny.
RxJS looks like this.
That's what I'd say. Which one came first, right?
It's .NET. So yeah,
Yep.
.NET actually came as Reactive Extensions came out of the .NET world. They're not used. It's funny if you go to the JavaScript world, it's like, yeah, we all use Reactive Extensions. But then if you talk about it in the .NET world, it's just not definitely not as common.
Yeah.
So this is cool. So again, if we just run this one more time here, take a look at this.
And I really like how the code reads. Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that's important. Like, if I think about what it would have taken for me to have written this in the callback style, I can't even imagine the amount of like variables I'd have to have and checking and semaphores and locks and all kinds of stuff just to kind of get this to work. And this seems extremely declarative, right? Like, here's what I want to do. Like, subscribe, unsubscribe, connect to this event, unsubscribe to that event. And then now you put them together with combined latest. I was like, oh, okay. You had two observables listening to two different inputs. And then now I kind of smush them together. It's almost like I think Link calls it zip. I think it was will be similar to like a zip operation.
Yeah, we have a zip operator in Reactive Extensions, a little different. It'll zip two observables together. But yeah, it's that kind of idea. Like, give me these two things in sort of, I don't want to say merge because merge is a different operator, but give me that latest data and put it together. Like, I always think things as like conveyor belts. It's like two conveyor belts coming together to send that data, right? Or a zipper coming together,
right?
Which would be that same idea.
So we got a really interesting comment here in chat, and this one is coming from YouTube. And Mark's saying, I recently used Rx for the first time to turn a callback-based API into an IEnumerable. I don't totally understand how it worked, but it's simple and awesome. So, I mean, hey, when it works, man, it works.
That's it. That was kind of my first introduction into Reactive Extensions. I saw a presentation by Annie Betts, who's somebody who used to work at GitHub, and she built a lot of these like really cool tools and this whole framework called Reactive UI. And it was one of those things that you see it and you're like, I don't understand that right now, but I understand that that's awesome. Like I don't, right. I could tell that it's cool, but there is a learning curve here for sure. It's not something you're going to pick up in a day or something like that. Perhaps it will require a little bit of knowledge and familiarization out there.
So then to that point, here's a question I want to ask you is, so this person, they want to figure out who can I talk to learn more about RX and samples and stuff. Like, can they reach out to you on, I don't know, Twitter or something, some social thing?
Yeah, at Michael Stonis on Twitter. I've got a Twitch channel. It's Michael Stonis. If you just search for Michael Stonis anywhere, you're going to catch me or a more handsome Michael Stonis that is a photographer. So I'm the developer one, not the photographer one. So.
Got it. Okay. So there you go, Mark. So if you had a question, maybe you have a code snippet and you just want to be like, hey, what does this thing do? Maybe you could shoot him a quick tweet or, raise a GitHub issue or hit him up on his channel, and then you can check that out.
Yeah. And I've got tons of examples too out there on my GitHub. Again, it's Michael Stonis. And I've got example applications and stuff like that if you want to mess around with it. And reactivex I'm going to say .net.
And then while you're doing that, I'm going to look up your GitHub account. I'm going to go ahead and share that with folks that they could check it out.
It's reactivex.io. That's the place where it is. So yeah, reactivex.io. That's the website that is like all things reactive extensions.
Okay. I'm just going to paste your GitHub in here really quick. So for folks that want to go ahead and check it out, it is github.com/Michael Stonis. No dots or slashes, just like one straight word. Yep. And you can go ahead and take a look through his repositories. And like you said, there's a couple of examples there you can check out. One more question really quick before you go on. So Ancient Coder is asking, are there any recommended publications or tutorials?
Yeah, I thought this might come up. So I grabbed this book here. I've got 2 books. I'm going to reach back 1 second.
Sure.
Let me grab. All right. So I've got book number 1 here. This is RX in Action.
Oh, that's a good book.
By Tamir Drescher. Forwarded by Eric Meyer. He's one of the people that helped, create our reactive extensions. Yeah. This is a great, fairly comprehensive book that covers like all the different operators, all the different stuff that you can do with reactive extensions. And then if you are looking to do user interfaces, there's a whole framework for reactive extensions for user interfaces specifically. And this is UI and reactive UI.
Nice. I like that title.
Kent, and this is a great way if you're looking to build user interfaces and stuff like that for using reactive extensions. That is a great book and a great reference that I always recommend. Those 2 are top recommendations by me.
Awesome. There you go. So you all can check out those books wherever you buy your books from or wherever you get your things from, and hopefully they'll help you in your journey in learning RX a little bit more. For sure. So one thing I want to point out here. So this is something that I know is another kind of difficulty point for people that are learning reactive extensions, in that, when we deal with IEnumerable, you've always kind of got something returned to you, right? So it might be empty. There might not be anything in it, but you always get something. In the reactive extensions world, things may never happen. So for example, what I mean by that, if we take a look here at my event pattern, this is waiting for this event to occur. And so what I want to have happen is I want this name to calculate as soon as I make changes to either of these, right? So if I type in Michael, what you might notice down here is that I didn't get any output. And the reason is because what our function is doing here, this combine latest, is waiting for notifications from both of these, right? So combine latest, meaning that it needs a latest value to come through. So as soon as I type in anything down here in the last name, you'll notice all of a sudden I got my my values out there. So there's a way to get around this, or there's a way, they've kind of thought of everything in the reactive extensions world. And so in this case, what we might want to do is something like a start with. You could think of this as kind of like a pre-primed value for our observable here. So I might just say start with string dot empty, right? And so in this case, even if my event never fires off here, I've got just a default starting value. So because, again, it's not guaranteed that anybody's ever going to type in that first name or that last name, we're just going to give it kind of a placeholder value to use to start this off. And again, once again, if I just run this here,
you'll notice I've got, it might be a little bit hard to see there on the stream, but there's already a comma out there, and I could say, Michael here. And immediately I've got my output out there.
And that seems really responsive too. Like as you're typing it, it doesn't seem like there's almost no delay at all. It's not like it has to think about evaluating the RX expression. It just kind of just happens.
Yeah, it's it's going to be scheduled out here on the UI thread. So in this case, so in terms of performance, yeah, you're not going to be dealing with like a huge overhead, from performance there, which is again pretty awesome.
Right.
Again, if we kind of keep on expanding on this, if I did get something in here where my default came through and say like, that first time it came through and it was just that comma space, I might not want that. I could, again, just start introducing about a bunch of link operators that I'm familiar with. So this might not be ideal. This might not be the best way. We'll say where full name, oops. And we'll say, now we're only interested in this case where it is not with our full name out there, right? So if, in this case, when we rerun this again, we won't get any output out there initially, but as soon as we start to get values in something that's a little bit different, we can start to get that name displayed. So again, it'll wait until I get some values in there and get the values that I'm interested in, and we could filter out values maybe that aren't important to me.
Nice.
One other thing I'll show just really quick here is, a lot of times we're going to do work that is computationally intense. Getting a text change may not be the most intense thing, but imagine we're calling like an API in the middle here, and it's going to go do some work, and maybe we don't want to repeat call it. So think of it if you're doing like a web search and you have the type ahead in a web search, and it doesn't constantly with every single character that you hit go back to the server. It's going to wait and kind of maybe prepare a little bit of data for you and then send it over afterwards. Reactive Extensions gives us a whole bunch of really cool ways that we can kind of slow down data or potentially group up data and prepare data so that we're not just dealing with everything on an individual basis. It also is going to give us a way to basically say, maybe if data comes through in a big block, ignore it for a little bit and then give me a value. And I'm going to do that here using this throttle operator. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, hey, I'm going to get an element in. After I get this element in, wait a period of time before you actually send notifications through. So imagine if somebody's typing their name in really fast and, if you're a really quick typer, we may not want to send every character over. We might want to say something like, wait, let's wait like a half a second until they've finished typing, until we've got that last notification. And then let's send that notification through. Actually, I'll just do we'll do 2 seconds, just in case I'm typing slow today. And what you'll notice out here then is I can get my name together. But now I could start doing some more advanced filtering and setup out here. So if I keep on typing, you'll notice down below, it's not updating my name. That's because it continues to get notifications. If I stop, take my hands off the keyboard, we're going to be held up there. So this is expected. I know we got an exception. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But what we're doing out here is we're waiting. We are going to throttle our notification here for a period of time. Now, throttling and holding up that component out there needs to happen, or by default is going to happen off of my UI thread, right? So it's basically happening, on a thread pool thread out there that it's holding that stuff up. So this is kind of one other last quick thing I want to show here before we continue on, is that reactive extensions also give us a really cool way to switch threads in our code. So this is, it's a little bit hidden, but in the reactive extensions, we have this concept of this thing called a scheduler. And that's going to allow us to tell us where we want to go do work. And so in this case, this would be something like task pool default, right? So this work, it's going to throttle this work kind of off of our user interface thread and go do that somewhere else, right? But then finally, I may want to tell this that, hey, I'm updating my user interface thread. And again, traditionally in Xamarin Forms, we might do something like in here, I'm going to write this out the long way, and then we'll write it the nicer way. You might write something like this. Let me get that out of the way there. To tell this to go update your user interface on the user interface thread. This feels like it's going against what we're doing, though, right? It kind of feels like, hey, I've got this nice sort of fluent layout here with everything telling me where to go do its work. But then finally, I got to kind of come in here and like wrap up my code and sort of cram this piece on here to tell it that in this case, you need to go back to the user interface thread. Like I mentioned, though, they kind of thought of everything. And one of the cool things that we could do with reactive extensions is we could tell our code where to schedule its work. And so in this case, what I could do is I could tell this to observe on, and I've made this forms UI scheduler.instance here. And I could tell this where to go do its work. So let me just kind of clean all that work up that I just did here. Right now I could tell this, do the throttle work very explicitly, go do this on a background, on the task pool scheduler out here. And then I could tell this to go observe on the forms UI scheduler. And that's basically just a little piece of code that I wrote that will take our code and execute it on our UI thread for forms. So running this again, I could now.
So now if we run this, we're not going to expect to see any exceptions.
I certainly hope not.
Hopefully we won't. Crossing our fingers. Hopefully we don't.
So now I'll have Michael. We'll give it a couple seconds out here. There we go. Right. So now it's basically saying, hey, I want to go do this work. I could tell it where I want to do work. And this also can get pretty neat, because what I could have done earlier on is I could say observe. Again, I could say, go do this block of work from here to here. Go do this or schedule this out here on the task pool scheduler. So go do this work out on that scheduler. But then once we hit this observe block, and for anything below it, schedule that work on a different scheduler. In our case, schedule it on the UI. If we were to do something, again, I'm going to do something that's going to look a little bit funny here for a moment. I could do something like, say, return X. Typing is hard. There we go. Sorry, there we go. Return X. And I could say, sorry, oops, wrote this backwards. Pretend that this is
like some long running operation that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I could do is I could tell that long running operation to go occur back on the task pool scheduler. Maybe I've got like a loading animation or an icon or something like that that I want to continue to run on my user interface, or I want to keep my user interface responsive while we're loading the data. What I could do is I could tell it to go do this work on a background thread. But then once it's completed, once we've got everything set up here and ready for us again, we could just move it back to the UI thread. Again, all of this is being done kind of back to that block of code kind of idea. All this is done in sort of one big story here, right? I could read it from the top to the bottom. Here's where my data came from. Here's where I want to do my work. Here's some work that I am doing, additional work that I'm doing. And then finally, here's my subscription and what we're going to spit out at the end out there. With the exception of just one thing here, that forms UI scheduler, all this other stuff comes right out of the box with reactive extensions. So there's a ton of really good helper stuff that comes along the way.
Nice. So we got a couple of questions that have been coming in as you've been going through the samples, and I have questions too. So let's see if we can get to some of these.
Sure.
Let's see if we can get to some of these really quickly. So first question I want to touch on. So this actually came in a while ago, but I want to make sure that we address it. And this person is asking, what is your opinion about back pressure? So maybe really quick, you can tell us what back pressure is, and then what is it, like, why should we care about back pressure?
Yeah, so back pressure, imagine you just get a flood of notifications in. You've got to be able to deal with them. There's not probably, I would say this is probably one of the, a bigger downfall of reactive extensions. So if you've got something that's emitting just an incredible amount of notifications and we need to be able to handle them, if you don't do anything about it, you're going to have to deal with those one-on-one. So it is something that could queue up. You can maybe blow out a memory or something like that if you have that situation. Somebody who's probably more of a guru than me on this, or there's probably somebody who's got a good answer. There always is. There's definitely always people better than you.
Sure.
But if you're dealing with a back pressure situation, that might want you to start using different operators, something like a throttle. Maybe do some buffering, do some additional filtering to get stuff out of that back pressure. To remove things from being sort of backlogged out there. So that is probably, it's a great point. If you're in that situation, you really want to do what you can to filter out, if you can, again, any kind of chaff or any kind of cruft that you can out there and sort of just filter it down to the data that you're into. But yeah, that's definitely one of the more difficult things to deal with reactive extensions.
Sure. And I guess kind of like what you said, based on what you're doing, you can apply different strategies to that, right? Whether it's buffering, or maybe I can offload those events into another thing. Maybe I put them into a queuing system or something like that. And now I have another intermediary that can help me to apply some of those back pressure patterns.
Yeah, definitely. We've had situations where we've worked with CAN systems in cars or Bluetooth LE where they're just kind of blasting out data all over the place.
Yeah.
We'll do something to maybe only take data at a certain interval or only look for certain characters coming through the data to try to filter out stuff that we're not interested in, right?
Sure. That makes sense. All right, this one is coming in from YouTube, and Andrew is asking, with C# 8 and above, it appears to be some overlap in how we could solve similar problems with either RX or async streams, so async enumerable and system.link.async. So Michael, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so async enumerable, I'm going to say it's kind of like, if we think of this evolution, right? We've kind of got enumerable out here. That's like our first first component for dealing with lists of data. And then we've got all the way on the other end. I'm not going to say that it's the more evolved version, but it's a different evolved version of reactive extensions are on the other side. The async enumerable is kind of like a great in-betweener, the merging of those two kind of in between a little bit. If you're doing a lot of server side stuff, if you're doing a lot of, trying to think, not exactly event-based programming. I think async enumerable is a great place to get in there if you've got to do multiple API calls and you just kind of want to yield out the data as you get it and things like that. So I think it's a great, everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different here, but I think it's sort of a great in-between place. If you don't feel like you want to jump all the way over to the reactive extension side of things, but you want some of those features, just another place to go in and start to get, I would say to dabble your feet in some of the reactive extensions features and kind of merge those two ideas together there.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question to what Andrew's asking is, can we use them both together? Like, can I use async enumerable to, maybe there's certain operators I want to use. I know there's like a retry operator and there's throttle and there's all these types of things. But as these events come in, can I pipe them into, I guess it's like an async yield or something? I'm pretty sure there's an async yield of some sort. And then proactively pull them instead of being pushed them. Because I kind of look at them as like, one is a push model and one is a pull model.
That's exactly right.
In terms of like implementing that back pressure that we spoke about in the previous question, you know what I mean? I can have my RX things, my observable things coming in at whatever rate that they're coming in at, that now I could proactively pull asynchronously using async enumerable to kind of, I guess, add that layer of back pressure to it, maybe.
Yeah, I know this is where my understanding of async enumerable is going to probably start falling apart a little bit. I know that you can make them work together, but the best way to do that, I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember if there is a bridge for a to enumerable on async enumerable, or if that was just a proposal. But I know that there is some ways. But you are right. First of all, that one's sort of a push model and one's a pull model out there. But I know that there are some ways to bridge them together. I'm just not sure what that functionality is exactly to do that. Sure.
And then I think, I actually just did a really quick search, and it looks like there was an issue opened up on the RX repo. I'm going to paste this in the chat so you could take a look at it, so everyone can take a look at it. But it looks like there was an issue raised, but this was raised in 2017. And it was closed because the last message was, we'll reconsider after C#8. So I guess if people are still interested in doing that, if you reopen an issue or open a new issue to talk about how you can bridge those two together, then I'm sure the folks on the rx.net repo might pay some attention.
Speaking of bridging, if you are doing a lot of async work today, async and observables are, get together like peanut butter and jelly. They work together hand in hand very well. So an enumerable can be converted into a task return or an async return. And likewise, any async method can be wrapped up as an observable as well. It's basically an observable that emits a single time, right? It'll happen in the future sometime, but it emits a single time out there. So working with async and observables, like I said, like peanut butter and jelly, they work together quite well.
Nice. Now it's my turn. I've been asking everyone else's questions. I have a question though that I want to ask you.
Do it. Yep.
And this actually had to do with the code sample that you were showing just before we kind of got into it. Now I see that there's like an observable on, and I think at some point there was a subscribe on at some point. And I know for me that was like a source of, there's a subscribe on, and so for me that was a source of confusion. Like now I don't understand what is going. Like the minute that came in, I'm like, I don't understand what's happening.
Yeah. So
right.
The short answer is you probably don't want to use this. If you're using this, there's a good chance that you're not using it right. So subscribe on basically says when we build up our subscriptions, when we handle some of the workflow pieces like our on next, when we deconstruct our observable, this is where we want to manage that subscription on. This is the thread that we want to manage that subscription on.
Sure.
Sort of like underlying, when we create this, and when we manage some of the I want to call them like framework pieces, but that's maybe an oversimplification. That's where this is the thread, or this is the scheduler rather, I should say, that we want to go do that work on. The observe on then is more of an instruction of, for the work that's below me, this is where I would like to schedule this unit of work. And realistically, if you're looking to do something on a background thread or the task pool scheduler, if you're looking to schedule something to be done for the user interface, observe on is the one that you'll want to use out there, because this will take the notifications and then queue those up to be executed on that scheduler.
Okay.
So short answer, if you're using subscribe on, you probably, unless you have a very
If you're
specific
using it, don't use it.
yeah, it's unless you have a specific use case, and there are definitely specific use cases, but for most people, you probably don't need it. Yeah.
Okay, because as I'm looking at your example, I was thinking like, so how you had it before, there was that first observe on, right? So now you're gonna call that observe on. That select many is gonna run on that task pool thread. So it's taking it off the UI thread and putting it on a task pool thread. Yeah. And then when we get down to the second one that's on line 46, it's saying, okay, go back to the UI thread, pretty much.
Correct.
So in my head, when you were first doing it, I thought you were going to do observe on the first one, sure, and I thought the second one you're going to do a subscribe on. Since I mean, but because I wasn't sure what was going on, and so sure. In my head I thought that's where subscribe on would go, right? But it sounds like we don't need it, and if I could just say observe on this other thing, I can continue with the rest of my operators and just say, hey, this is the thread that I want this work to happen on.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's where I think, especially some of the naming overlaps can become a little confusing, right? Because at the very bottom here, we have the subscribe and you're like, but there's subscribe on and observe on, and which one am I doing right now? Again, by and large, this isn't, perfect. There's definitely going to be cases where you want to use one over the other, but when you think of what's happening sort of in this middle chunk here, this is all your observance of these notifications, right? So you're telling these observe on, go do your work here. And so that's kind of the mindset that you want to keep while you're doing this.
Got it. Okay.
And then one change I just made here really quick, and this is, again, something that I do just to kind of help keep people mentally separated on it, is we do have this kind of neat operator here. It's called do, where do just does something. It's not going to change the data that gets pushed along the way. It's basically just a place where you could go and do something out of band, perhaps, I'll say, for your observable. So in this case, updating my user interface isn't going to transform the data or need to update the data that gets pushed down to further subscribers. It's just really out there just to do something, right? And a lot of times we could do things like we'll use do statements to create
logging and stuff like that, I'm guessing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. So
I feel like do is almost like a wiretap. Like a wiretap being like, hey, there's a flow of information and I kind of just want to take a peep in the middle. I don't want to stop the flow. I just want to peep and see what's happening. And so I have like that wiretap, right, to kind of get some insight into those messages.
Yep, totally. Yep. So since it is, it's basically, it doesn't return anything itself. We could just kind of inspect what happened out there, log it out, do something with it. It does, right? So
got it. Okay. Cool. All right. So we do have a couple of minutes left. And again, I still have questions, right? So last question that I'm personally going to ask is that, so I feel like as you're showing us these examples, in my head, what's happening is that every time you call subscribe, there's going to be like a stream of information that's going to be hit from the thing that is calling the subscribe method, right? So for instance, like if you just stopped to do, I would have gotten I observable, right? And then I could call subscribe on the observable and now I'm getting events, right? What would happen if I had one observable, but I had different things calling subscribe on that observable? Would we all receive the same information, or would there be n number of streams of information flowing to those different clients?
Yeah, so let's say we'll call this our name setup observable. So the idea is we're going to have some observable that is out here. It's going to do everything that we talked about out here. And if we set up this all the way through, kind of like you described there, like all the way through the do, in that case, actually, I'm going to take it, if you don't mind, just a few steps back so we could actually do something interesting here, I guess. I'm going to take it all the way through the throttle. And what I could do is this will be that same observable up here. And if I did something else, again, let's say I wanted to have somebody else subscribe to the same set of data, right? Maybe I don't want to use it for updating the UI, but in this case, maybe I want to grab this, and we'll don't even care about that. We'll just use another do operator out here. And out here, then we will say, we'll just do our right line. So right line, and sorry, we'll do full. Okay. So at this point in time, what this will do is it's going to make two separate subscriptions to this block up here. So it's almost like, if we were writing this in code, I would have plus equals and plus equals twice for this and everything else that goes along with it. In some cases, that might be desirable. In some cases, what you really want is to create sort of, call it like one, you want to have like this like factory or one conveyor belt that no matter how many people subscribe, it's just that one conveyor belt, if that makes sense, right? And so to manage that, so if you don't want these to be individual, so again, every time we would come down here and call this subscribe, right here it would redo this thing in these two cases. If you don't want that to happen, what you can do with our observable is we could say publish. Okay. And our publish operator out here, it's going to make this thing called a multicast, a multicast observable. So this is going to allow essentially a single subscription to this observable for multiple subscribers. The other thing that we could do then is we're going to use this operator called ref count, which says, as long as somebody is subscribed to this observable, keep it alive. So as soon as we get one subscriber, it lives. And then as soon as we get 2 or 3 or 5 subscribers, they're all getting that same feed of data. But then we're going to keep it alive until the last person listens to it. So now this block of code sort of gets initialized one time, if you will. And then for the first subscriber, or excuse me, when the first subscriber calls, this block of code will get initialized. But then when the second subscriber comes along, it's just going to tap right into that same feed of data out there.
Huh. Okay. So that makes sense. So then I add that publish, right? Mm-hmm. And now, so then I don't have to do anything special from the perspective of my subscribers, right? The things that are calling subscribe, I could just call publish ref count, and then it'll just handle that multicast connectivity for me, I guess.
Correct. Yes, that'll handle everything from your observer side. The subscribers are kind of ignorant to it. They don't know. They just say, oh, this looks like something I'm interested in. They don't know whether it had been set up before or if this is the first time it's being set up. They just know that that looks like the conveyor belt that's interesting to them. So just start giving us data, essentially.
Got it. Got it. Wow. Okay. So Michael, I feel like we can ask you like tons more questions. You know
sure.
what I mean?
Sure.
But we're running out of time. We're like almost an hour and 15 minutes into it.
No worries.
Do you have any final examples that you want to show folks before we take off?
I think we've gone plenty far enough here for today.
Okay. We're gonna have to do like a part 2 and 3 and like
sure.
finish all the
Anytime,
stuff we didn't
man.
get to talk about for sure.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, hey, thank all of you for joining us. This has been great. I know there are folks here from like all different parts of the world, so we really appreciate you spending the last hour and change with us. You know, whether it's dinner time or breakfast time or lunchtime or just time to eat, right? Like I definitely appreciate it. Like Michael said, you can go ahead and reach out to him at Michael Stonis on all the social things, Twitter, GitHub. There's a Twitch account that you said you had, Michael, that folks could reach out to you there as well.
Yep. And
if you have more RX questions, definitely feel free to let us know. If you want to learn more and you want Michael to come back and do another session, because I definitely feel like y'all have a lot of questions that we didn't get to. But if you do have more questions and you want to see more RX related topics, maybe something from the server side, maybe more RX with Xamarin things and desktop things, let us know, and then we could figure it out. But again, if you don't want it, we're not going to do it. If you do want it, we're going to try and figure it out. So that being said, thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll catch up with you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.